Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I'm Jennifer LaRue. I'm the Director of Public Programs at the Mark Twain House and Museum in Hartford, Connecticut. And I am so delighted to see so many of you here from all over the place for this afternoon's talk with Alex Michaelides and Brad THOR, who I just spent a few moments with in the green room. And I can guarantee you, you're in for a good hour with the two of them. So thank you again for joining us. I am going to talk for only a few moments just to familiarize those of you who might not know much about how to use Crowdcast with some of its features and to share a little bit of other information with you before I introduce Alex and Brad. First of all, you've all clearly discovered the chat. That's awesome. Please do keep chatting away. That's part of the fun of virtual programming in general, and particularly about Crowdcast. This program is being recorded and will live on our website, marktwainhouse.org, after it's over. But the chat remains live. So if you connect with somebody or want to continue the conversation afterward, you can do that just by going to the website and finding this, or just by following the link that you used to get here in the first place today. Speaking of things that are on your screen, you are using the chat for chat, and that's perfect. But if you have a question for Alex or Brad, we are going to have a Q&A session toward the end of our program. And rather than post your questions in the chat, if you could do us the favor of putting them in the Ask a Question area at the bottom of your screen, that makes it a lot easier for us to keep track of them. And another thing you can do is look at other people's questions, and if you have the same question, you can upvote it, and that moves it to the top of the pile. So please keep that in mind as we move through the program. I've been promised there are going to be no spoilers, and I'm going to be a stickler about that. I'm going to interrupt the conversation if it's a spoiler. I'm just warning everybody right now. Right beneath my face is a button that says Birdies for Charity. That is an opportunity for you to help the Mark Twain House out if you possibly can. We as a staff are really, really proud of the work we've done to keep the Mark Twain House alive and vibrant during this past really trying year and a half. For much of that time, we have been without our major revenue source, which is our guided house tour. I'm pleased to say we are back in business with that, but it has been a rough year for us financially. We have been committed to providing these programs, almost all of which have been offered free of charge. And so I just will tell you that if you are able to spare anything, $1, $10, whatever you can share with us, on behalf of the staff and the Board of Trustees of the museum, every penny is deeply appreciated and put to very good use. And now's a very good time to make a donation if you're able to, because the Travelers Golf Championship, through its Birdies for Charity program, adds 15% to whatever donations are made during this time by clicking that button. So if you are inclined and able, now's a really good time to take advantage of that opportunity, and we do appreciate anything you can do to help us. Another way you can help us is by following the link that Jacques just reposted in the chat. We are giving you the opportunity to purchase through our museum store a signed copy of the Maidens. Now we know we're no dummies. We know you can get this book elsewhere, but if you do buy it through us, number one, you are getting a signed copy, and you're supporting the Mark Twain House and Museum through your purchase. So please consider doing that as we move through the program today. So I'm almost done. I just want to thank our sponsors. Today's program is sponsored, as so many of our programs are, by the Wish You Well Foundation and by Connecticut Public WNPR. And it's produced in part with support honoring the legacy of Frank Lord. So our guests today, Brad THOR, who's an old friend. He talked for us last July already when his recent book, Near Dark, came out. He's a New York Times bestselling author of 21 thrillers, and he's like the world's nicest guy. So I look forward to bringing him on screen in a moment. Brad will be in conversation with Alex Michaelides. He was born and raised in Cyprus, has an MA in English Literature from Trinity College, Cambridge University, and an MA in Screenwriting from the American Film Institute in Los Angeles. The Silent Patient, which many of you have read, was his first novel. It spent more than a year on the New York Times bestseller list and sold in a record-breaking 50 countries. And he's speaking with us today from his home in London. So people, please join me in welcoming Alex and Brad to the screen. It can take just a second for everybody to get up here and mic'd up. So, and here we go. Alex and Brad, thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Jennifer.
And Brad, will you let me know when it's time for Q&A and I'll pop back on the screen?
Yeah, I figure we'll talk maybe 30 or 40 minutes, and then we can do 20 minutes of questions, and then everybody's out at the top of the hour.
Sounds good. Sounds like a great lunch break to me. Enjoy.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Alex, this is a pleasure. I'm a big fan. So when they asked me to do this, it was an automatic yes. So thank you for participating. This is a great venue. I love everybody at the Mark Twain House, and I know the audience is going to love you. So thank you for doing this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for doing it as well. I'm really excited. I wish we could be doing it in person, but hopefully sometime next year, perhaps.
I was saying the same thing when I was in your seat last year. I was saying, I hope I get to see everybody in person next summer. And unfortunately, we're still not 100% there yet. Now, before we went live, you said that you've had a booking that you were supposed to go to France, right?
Yeah,
and do an in-person event. And that's no longer on the books for you?
Yeah. I was meant to be going to do press for the French launch of the Maidens, and then to a very exciting crime festival in Lyon. And I was so looking forward to it. But I found out yesterday that because of the Delta variant, they're no longer accepting British participants. So it's a real shame. I was really hoping that things might be opening up now, but, soon, I hope. You have to stay optimistic, right?
Well, exactly. And thank goodness we've got this technology that we can do things virtually. Yep. And so this is probably, I've only done a couple of these, only done them for friends and writers whom I love, and you're one of them. Your freshman effort, The Silent Patient, was so fantastic. And one of the things that authors have is this sophomore slump, where you get incredible critical acclaim and sales with a breakout huge first novel, and then that second one, there's a lot of pressure on the author, and sometimes it can impact the quality of the book. That didn't happen with The Maidens. But did you feel that pressure? You've got an MA, so you've heard of sophomore slump and all of that kind of stuff for the second book after hit. Did you feel any of that, Alex?
Yeah, that's very kind of you to say that. I related it less to books and more to albums, because a lot of my favorite singers all had like a smash first album, and then the second album was always a disaster. And so at the back of my mind, there was that worry, And the English writer Stephen Fry said you have 40 years to write your first novel and then like 6 months to write your second one. And so there was this anxiety about it. To be honest with you, it was a very different place. I started the Silent Patient in a kind of, I'd say probably the lowest ebb of my life, in the sense of that creatively and financially and everything. I've been a screenwriter, and it was a pretty disastrous career on the whole. And I got to this place where I thought, okay, before I really quit, I have to try and just prove to myself that I can write something. So I want to just try and write a novel, a detective story, kind of psychological thriller for myself, to see if I can do it. And it's a kind of love letter to the genre. And, but I was feeling very beaten up at that point. And then my last agent had just dropped me, so I didn't even have an agent. And I had staked zero expectation that anybody would ever read the book. And it had to be kind of, prized to my fingers ultimately to send to an agent, when I finished writing it. And so the success of the novel really did take me by surprise. And it was a very different situation when I was then trying to write a second book. But can you hear that?
I apologize. I did not realize the phone was plugged in the office.
Oh, okay, as long as it's the phone and not some sort of terrible internet catastrophe, then that's fine.
No, I apologize. If it happens again, I'm going to step off screen. I'm going to give you a topic that you can discuss and I'll unplug it. That's how anybody that needs access to my house. And today we, as I told you, we had a little bit of a mechanical problem in the house. So all the pictures are here. Yeah. Your story is amazing to me, because I think a lot of people romanticize what it must be like being an author. And to hear that you were in this very difficult place financially, professionally, vis-a-vis your agent, and how you felt about the screenwriting business, I only talked to you for a few minutes before we went live, but I've watched some interviews with you and things like this. I get this nice feeling that was only reinforced in the green room of your humility and your honesty. so much of that comes through in the novels. And Jennifer is hovering just off screen. She's like an old-fashioned 1950s TV censor. She's ready to hit this button to stop us from talking. If any spoilers are even, we get to the edge of a spoiler, and it's killing me because I've talked up your books to so many people, and they've asked me, well, what's it about, blah, 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 blah. And I have to really police myself not to give anything away. So when I was thinking about what we should talk about, I've lived in Greece, and I don't even know what side of Cyprus you were on, if you were on the Greek side or the Turkish side.
Right. I was on the Greek side.
Okay. Did you grow up speaking Greek?
I grew up speaking both. My mother is English and my father is Greek Cypriot. So I was really fortunate to have like an equal influence of both cultures, I think, which was amazing. Yeah. It was a really crazy place to grow up.
So there are, without giving anything away in the book, there is a character's experience in Greece, young, going to the marketplace with the housekeeper. How much of your youth on Cyprus made it into the Maidens?
A lot of it, I tried to kind of put myself into the shoes of the main character. And so she and I ended up becoming more and more similar as the writing went on, I think. And I wanted to kind of bring my Greekness or Cypriotness or whatever the right word is into the novel, because I feel that, all you really have as a writer is your own point of view. And I was just trying to make it as real and as authentic as I could, which is why, like say in The Silent Patient, that's the reason that I made Theo into a psychotherapist, because I wanted to write this detective story, but I didn't know anything about detectives. And I felt that it would be inauthentic and it would be shallow if I tried to write a detective story. But I had trained as a therapist, although I didn't qualify, and I had worked in a psychiatric unit. And so I thought, okay, well, I know a bit about therapists, and so I can make my detective into a therapist. And likewise with the Maidens, I thought, okay, well, I want to bring in my experience of what it's like to grow up in Greece and what it's like to be a foreigner moving to England as well, because that's what Mariana does. And so it's both kind of elements of that went into it. Yeah.
So where were you in your life when the idea for The Silent Patient came to you? Was this something that you had thought about doing a screenplay for? Had it been banging around in your head for years? Was it something completely brand new? How long was it in your mind? And where did the spark come from?
I'm sure you know better than most people that ideas for novels and stuff aren't just born overnight from one thing. It's sort of like different strands of things coming into play, I think. So it's three different things. Well, the main first one was growing up and reading thrillers on the beach. And they were like the first adult books that I read. And I read a lot of like classic thrillers, like obsessively. And I'd always said to myself at that age, around 13 years old, that I would really one day love to try and write a detective story or a thriller. So it had been, yeah, right. It's the same for you, I'm sure, yeah. And you carry that around with you for 20 years before you finally sit down and think, okay, I'm going to do it now. And the other aspect of it with the Greek mythology was just part of my childhood and my heritage and growing up, in Cyprus, where Greek mythology is so present, and you were taught it at schools, and you were taught the Greek tragedies at schools. And so, again, it took years of kind of wrestling with these plays and thinking about them and thinking about these stories. And then the third component, it didn't all come together until I was working in a psychiatric unit, and how like Agatha Christie's all of her major classic novels, they're all each one set in like a different enclosed iconic location. And I remember walking along the corridor in the psychiatric unit one day on the way to meet a patient, and suddenly thought, this would be an amazing place to set a mystery. And no one's done that before in the way that I would like to do it, like kind of detective story, psychological detective story. And so when I thought that, then suddenly everything else kind of came together, and I thought, oh, well, that's what my detective story that I'm going to write one day could be about, and then these kind of three things came together. But it took 20 years for all the ideas to germinate,
Well, so I'm fascinated now because you and I have this in common. I really do believe what you say is correct. And I appreciate your honesty in wanting to write kind of a detective mystery thriller from the position of a therapist versus trying to write from the position of a detective, from a police officer's experience. I think that's very honest and very real. Stephen King once said that you should write what you love to read because that's where your passion is. And when I speak to young writers, I add to that and say, you also have a mini PhD in the genre because you've read so many books in the genre, probably multiple books by the same authors. You know why certain books resonated with you and why others didn't. So I want to back up to that young 13-year-old Alex on the beach reading these thrillers. Who are some of the authors that you were reading back then that formed kind of your base, or your love of thrillers?
I don't know how well known they are in America. I have a bit of a blank in terms of my knowledge regarding that. But, you know, for me, I grew up very much like obsessed with these very English crime writers. And part of it for me was, you know, that's what I tried to put in the Maidens also, as a separate strand to the conversation, is this love of Englishness and England and a kind of idealized, romanticized version of that country. And that, you know, because I grew up in a really hot rock, you know, you're in Nashville right now and you said how hot it is. Sorry, there's a car going by. You know, and I grew up in a very, very hot place by the beach and feeling, you know, this very dry desert-like country. And then I would read these English crime novels that were all set in like picturesque English villages where, you know, it rained all the time and there was a cricket lawn and willow trees and this whole world that was very, very romantic and appealing to me. So it wasn't just the crime element, it was also this kind of English universe that they were all set in. But I read, you know, Agatha Christie obsessively, Ngaio Marsh, Ruth Rendell, I love now particularly, Barbara Vine, you know, P.D. James. What's really crazy, Brad, maybe you could tell me why, because I don't know, is why they're all women. And why is it that women have written some of the best crime novels in existence?
Isn't that interesting? That's a great question. And I love P.D. James. I love Agatha Christie. And it's interesting because you have read stuff that is very much a part of who you are as a writer now and the area of the thriller genre that you inhabit. So I was reading Freddie Forsyth, John le Carré.
Oh, I love John le Carré. Now I'm kind of grown up to launch John le Carré. You know, it's funny how our reading tastes change as we get older. Yeah.
I agree. And I was sorry for his recent passing. And my dream has been, and it got crushed with COVID, I want to see Cornwall because that's where he was living. Yeah. So it's someplace that hopefully I'll get to travel to and it'll help add to my deeper.
But I would just throw this in there that I don't think there's a world of difference between John le Carré and Agatha Christie because they're both very, you know, he's spy novels and she's like murder, but they both are all about the twist. And I'm all about the twist too. And so there's something about John le Carré that I study him and I study his structure because his structure is second to none and it's brilliant how it's always he always turns everything on its head at the end, always, you know.
I love this because you are saying despite the success you've had, and your success has been phenomenal, there are so many authors, even 10 books in, that would give their eye teeth to have the kind of success that you had just with your first book and that you're having with the second book. So this is interesting for me, is that you continue to be a craftsperson, someone who believes he can improve. You wouldn't study other authors and what they do if you weren't looking to make your own work better. Am I reading too much into that?
No, I assume that, maybe I'm wrong, but I would assume that all writers are like that to a certain degree. I certainly am. When I was studying at the American Film Institute, I was really lucky to have a fantastic teacher there who was a Disney writer. And he would tell us every day, you have to become a craftsman. You have to become a craftsperson. That's the way that you succeed. He's like, it won't keep you from being a genius, but you have to know what the rules are. And so the more that I study these writers, the more in awe of them I am, that they're brilliant at. There's nothing that you can't learn from like one of these classic writers about setup and payoff or twists and turns or red herrings and all the kind of bag of tricks that you need to really master in order to write a novel. I mean, you know that better than I do. Yeah.
It's something I spend a tremendous amount of my time. I try to read in my genre, try to read my contemporaries when I'm not writing, because I cannot read. I'm afraid that their voice is going to, without my kind of see the writing, right? Yeah. So, but I'm constantly in my off time, which is really not off time, but I write a book a year. I love that you started with the quote about 40 years for the first album, 6 months for the second, because it's so true. Because once you've written that first one, there's no pressure. There's no deadline. There's no nothing. You write that first novel as you did with The Silent Patient, and then it's hugely successful. And then you've got a publisher, you've got an agent, and they want the next one, right? Yeah. So that's difficult. So I want to ask you a question about your education, because I was a creative writing major at the University of Southern California. So undergraduate. I did not go on to get an MA, but I do have friends that have done it and so on and so forth. Do you feel that, and you've got 2 advanced degrees, so you've got your screenwriting, and do you feel that those helped better prepare you for the world of being an author or not?
That's a tricky question. I think it's a yes and no, really. I mean, I think I learned a lot. When I was at Cambridge, we studied really great writing. And, you know, my first advice to anybody who wants to write is just that they have to read and read really good writers. And that's what I try to do all the time. Just, again, trying to improve my style. In terms of the Film Institute, a little less so. I had really great teaching there, but the emphasis there is very much on kind of commercial filmmaking. And so I learned a lot there about how to structure a story. But I really think that if you're the kind of person I am, I'm slightly anxious, and you know, and I for the whole of my younger life, I would always try and just copy people. I think it's better just to liberate yourself from that and just kind of go away and just write your own stuff and stop trying to fit into a, you know, page 45, this has to happen, page 30, this has to happen. And that's very much the way they teach you. And I think it harmed me, to be honest with you. I haven't said this in an interview before, but I do think it took a long time to kind of move away from that and think, okay, well, what if I don't do that on page 15? What if I do something else instead? And that takes guts, and it takes practice and all those, you know, years of messing around, I think, before you can do stuff like that.
I agree with you. And I think it takes a lot of things that aren't necessarily inherent in the artist. I think there's a certain amount of, I think what keeps you honest as a writer is not fully trusting, I'm going to say your ability or your gift, but it's this constant, at least for me, is this good enough? Can I make this better? And if not for the deadlines, I would be polishing and polishing and polishing.
Yeah, I can take always. I don't think you would ever. I mean, you have to have it taken away from you. That's what Billy Wilder said. He said, "You're never finished. They just take it away from you." And The Silent Patient was the first. You know, I've been writing for 20 years when I wrote The Silent Patient, and it was the first thing I wrote that didn't make me want to throw up, like physically. So it takes a long time to get to a place where you feel like, okay, I'm improving now, and now I feel that I am improving at a much faster rate, but that's also because I have 2 incredible editors, you know, Ryan in New York and Matt in London, and together the 3 of us have been working, and they've improved me. I feel like I've improved a good 50% writing the Maidens through their influence and their comments and their guidance, and that was something I never had before, and that's something that I really cherish, you know.
It doesn't happen in a vacuum. When you've got a great team, it elevates your game. I agree. That's terrific. All right. So here you are, for all of us that are watching you from afar. You're in Britain. The first book, huge success. Second book, massive success. Tell us about your day when you're writing. This is let us peek behind the curtain. What is it like? Let's say it's a Wednesday. Where do you write? How do you write? Tell us a little bit about your process.
It's so funny you're saying this, right? Because today, just before we spoke, I was thinking my days are very full right now because I'm promoting the Maidens, and I was thinking it's so crazy because I'm really busy at the minute to go from being completely isolated, which is how I often am normally, to suddenly having all of these people to talk to and all of this stuff going on, and it's like it's from one extreme to the other, really. When I write, I lead a very solitary life, and I'd love to hear what you think, but I believe that solitude is important for writers. I think, like you said, I don't read other writers when I'm writing. I also don't try to get my head full of other people's conversations, and I spend a lot of time on my own. So when I'm writing, the pandemic helped in that sense, because I was locked in my apartment for a year. I get up, I meditate a lot. I always do that when I write. I go to the gym if I can. When the gyms weren't open, I would go for a long walk instead, and then would come back and then write. And then it's just this very kind of, you know, simple process. It's almost monastic in a way, or kind of like a bit like a hermit, because you want to get. My old teacher at the AFI said it's like getting in the river. You know, with a story, you want to get in the river and not get out of the river. And so there's an element of that. And because the Maidens is about a woman who's haunted by her past. The fact that I was on my own a lot of the time when I was writing it, and being kind of haunted by memories and sad and feeling quite sad and lonely, I was able to channel that into the book and into the character, which I think really helped, actually. But yeah.
Wow, I agree with you. Do you work a regular work week, a Monday to Friday, or will you work through the weekend, or do you only work weekends as you get closer to a deadline? How does that?
I think about it a lot. I used to think that I was only working if I was sitting at a laptop. And now I realize that some of the best work I did on the Maidens and the Silent Patient was on Hampstead Heath, which is this huge wild park near my apartment. And often, like, Dickens, when you read about Dickens, he would just walk for hours around London and walk and walk. And there's something like that's really liberating and freeing, I think, about that, because you're focused on something else. And so your subconscious is more free to come up with good ideas and plot twists and things like that. So I consider walking a big part of my writing day. And I do both. I sit at the desk, but I also walk around and think. And then if I get stuck at the desk, I'll go for a walk. So it's it's a kind of backwards and forwards thing.
There's something about motion that can help the creative process. I have and I can't believe I haven't broken anything in my office. I have a baseball bat that I like to swing when I get stuck and I don't feel like going out for a walk because it's too oppressively hot here or whatever. But I have a baseball bat. I have glass light fixed chandeliers and things like this. I'm amazed I haven't broken anything. But you're correct. There's something about movement that can.
There's this, when I was working at the psychiatric clinic, one of the psychiatrists always used to tell the kids, because it was an adolescent clinic, he'd always used to say, move a muscle to change a thought. And it's such a great saying, and it really stuck with me. And so sometimes if they were feeling very low, he would just say, move a muscle to change a thought. He'd get them up and just get them walking around the room or something. And there's something, like you're saying, something about the act of motion, which snaps you out of something. It's interesting. Mind, body,
or sometimes for me, if it's not motion, this is the motion. I have a glass of bourbon. You have to be careful. I mean, there's that fine line as artists.
I might try the baseball bat. I love that.
There's something about swinging the bat back and forth. But I did just read an interesting article about units of alcohol consumption. I saw the great movie with Mads Mikkelsen, Another Round, where he and the teachers decide they're going to keep their blood alcohol level at a certain position to see if it improves their performance on the job and things like this. But there was just an article in a British newspaper I was reading a week or two ago about why artists, the benefit. I didn't know that Google has a whiskey room. And for people who are doing coding at Google, if they get stuck trying to figure out the code, they can go into this room and have a whiskey or two whiskeys. Wow. And Google even recognizes that it frees up the brain a little bit.
Oh, yeah, it's interesting. So I never drink while I'm writing, and I never drink during the days that I'm writing, because I find A, it makes me cloudy if I'm trying to meditate, and B, that if I don't drink, I go to bed thinking about the book, sleep thinking about the book, wake up thinking about the book, and I'm in this kind of very heightened state. But what I do like using alcohol, and particularly tequila, for is editing, because it does totally put you on a different plane, and it allows you somehow to get a bit of a distance from this thing that you've spent a year writing. If you then take it out 2 weeks later or 6 weeks later and you have a drink while you read it, it's like you're reading something written by somebody else, so it's a very good idea.
That's interesting. And it's the opposite of that line that has been misattributed so often to Hemingway, which is write drunk and edit sober. Yeah. And so your thing is write sober and edit with a little tequila. I like that.
Yeah. I really believe that.
So I want to ask you, because you've gone from the screenwriting side of being an artist and creating content to the novelist side. Where are you with Hollywood right now? With The Silent Patient, with The Maidens? And I know it can be difficult. Sometimes they don't want you to talk about it if you've got an option or whatever it is. But is there anything as far as Hollywood you can share with us on?
Yeah, well, for both of them, amazingly, thankfully, excitingly, are in development option. I don't even know what the right words are. There is a screenplay for The Silent Patient. It's going to be a movie and a director attached, but I can't talk too much more about that. And The Maidens is going to be a TV series, which I'm really excited about. And there's a great writer who's attached, and she's about to start working on it this month, in fact. But I'm keeping my distance, deliberately, really, because I know too well from bitter experience that the screenplay doesn't often resemble the finished film. And so I think I'm not going to get hung up on somebody else's screenplay. The novel exists and it's already there. And so when I was talking to the writer of The Maidens and she had some questions for me, I just said, I think it should be your baby and you should just make these decisions on your own. And then I'll just watch it on TV. And that's the same with The Silent Patient. I'm just going to go to the cinema with like a big bag of popcorn and a big smile on my face. And just, that's going to be a good day for me, I think, when that happens. But I have no desire to control the product. And I feel very much now that I am a novelist and not a screenwriter. I think I'm better at writing novels, and I understand how they work better. And so I think it's important to trust other people, to let them get on with what they do well, you know?
I agree 100%. And as someone who has been over 2 decades in and out of deals in Hollywood, your most diehard readers will want to know, when is it coming to the screen? And now is a perfect time. It really is so good for novelists right now in Hollywood, because there's so much being created from books. So I think the respectability of novels and that being underlying content for films and episodic television is the best it's ever been. So congratulations on that. That's terrific. So I have a friend of mine named David Morrell, a thriller author. His first book, which was massively successful for him, was Rambo, that got turned into the Sylvester Stallone movie. And it's funny to be out with David because he introduces himself to everyone as Rambo's father, Rambo's dad. And he's taught in MA programs. He's a wonderful teacher, just a wonderful, wonderful man. And one of the pieces of advice he gives writers is, don't talk at all about what you're currently working on. I liken it to baby names. My wife and I learned very quickly that if we told people the name we thought we were going to give to the child she was pregnant with, you'd find people that said, oh, I dated a guy with that name and he was a jerk. Or I had a girlfriend who stole my car with that name.
Yeah. Or even they'll just like pull the wrong face and like, look a bit.
And it makes you think. Are you working on the next book? Is it something you can talk about at all, or something David Morrell also said that the reason you shouldn't talk about it, see, I'm giving you an out if you don't want to talk about it, but the reason you shouldn't talk about it is that the idea is very precious. Number one, you don't want to tip anybody else off what you're up to. Number two, this idea is supposed to propel you. It's supposed to be the passion, the fuel in your rocket to get you to this point next year where I can ask you, all right, we were talking, what stage were you in the book when we were speaking last year? So for everyone that has already ripped through both of your books, let's start with when, if you know, can we expect the next one?
Well, hopefully sooner. I mean, so it's, to tie up to your very first question about difficult second albums, I thought that when I finished the Maidens, that because it took a lot out of me to write, I thought I'd be very burnt out. And I thought I would just not be able to write anything for a long time. The weirdest thing happened. But as soon as I finished it, I felt so incredibly freed up and buoyant and inspired and excited that I started writing something straight away. And also I started writing something in a different way to what I've ever done before. I instead of planning obsessively, has been my tendency, I'm now writing something where it's much more freeform, and I don't quite know where I'm going, and I'm being surprised every day that I'm working on it. And I'm sitting, often this sounds insane, like I regret saying this, but I often sit there with like a smile on my face while I'm writing, and I've never had that before. So it's a real joy to be able to kind of feel, I'm excited and enjoying this process, and I'm kind of falling in love with writing again. So
that's okay. So that was one of the final questions I was going to ask you about process, because Dan Brown, who wrote the Da Vinci Code, and we have the same agent. And my agent said, Brad, you're a seat of your pants kind of writer, and maybe you should outline. And I'm friendly with Dan. She said, let me see if Dan will share with you the outline that he prepared for the Da Vinci Code. And it was fantastic. It was amazing. And I got to see all the parts that didn't make it into the book. And so I went and I outlined a thriller all set in Greece, by the way. And I sat down to write it, and I didn't want to write it. I lost all the passion. I like to know what needs to happen next. I've got a man who's been shot. He's got a briefcase full of bearer bonds, and he's got to get across Zurich to the train station in 15 minutes, and he's bleeding, and he's being chased. I don't want to know what's going to happen. In fact, I like to quote Robert Frost, who said, no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. No tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. Everyone's different, but you're mixing it up. It sounds like maybe you were an outliner before, and this time it's just kind of organic, letting the story show you where it wants to go.
It is. It definitely feels like that. And I don't know whether it's going to work or not, and I don't know if it's going to end up being good or terrible. But at least I think it was something about the achievement, the relief of having finished the second book and not having just been like a one-hit wonder, and managing to actually, I feel like I could call myself a writer now. I think with the first book, I felt like I kept telling myself, oh, it's just a fluke. It's just a fluke. But now I finished the second book and I'm proud of it. And now I think, okay, now I'm a writer and now I can try different things and be more flexible and more, organic is a good word. Yeah.
I love that you're doing it. I hit my several years ago. We had moved from Park City, Utah to Chicago, and I had we moved into a house that wasn't finished, and there was just all this stuff going on. And I had writer's block, and I went looking for advice, and I found a wonderful piece of advice, which has served me so well from that point forward, which is give yourself permission to write a crummy first draft.
Yeah.
His writer's block normally is just the writer's pressure on himself or herself. And if you take that pressure off, you can't edit what hasn't been written, right? So you can't polish words that haven't been written. And the fact is if you have any talent whatsoever, you're not going to write a crummy first draft. It's going to be a good first draft.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I think crummy is a polite word for my first drafts.
I like to clean it up for the Mark Twain house. That wasn't the word. It was not the word.
I didn't think it was the word. The AFI, they taught us something which definitely changed my life, and is the rule that I live by as a writer. And that was that you cannot edit and write on the same day, because it's different sides of the brain, and they just kind of they block each other out. And so what I tend to do when I write, say I have a chapter and I know what's got to happen in that day, in that chapter, I then don't even worry about grammar. I just get it out as fast as I can and get into a trance-like state almost of just trying to create. I don't think about paragraphs. I don't think about spelling. I don't think about good language. All of these are editing tools that you do on a different day, maybe with a little tequila, and you just sort of, analyze it and break it down. But I find it very important to keep the two things separate,
I do. And I have to tell you, this has been a wonderful conversation. I
feel like we could definitely talk about writing together for quite a long time, actually.
Well, hopefully we can do it over some tequila at some point.
Yeah. That would be really nice.
Once they rebuild our Nashville to London route, which I loved being able to go. It was such a great thing with BA. So hopefully that'll be back soon.
I didn't know about that. Okay, that's good to know. I'd love to go to Nashville one day.
Well, you're welcome anytime. Be my guest. I'd love to show you around. This has been such a pleasant conversation. And what I'd like to do now is, folks, if you have questions for Alex, Jennifer's going to hop back on. You can see in the bottom, at least in my screen, it's the bottom right-hand corner. Separate from the chat, there is a line that says ask a question. We've got a couple questions in there already. We have people helping to curate questions and pull them off. But if you can go to the ask a question, obviously you've seen Alex is very forthcoming with responses and everything. I'm going to sit back and allow Jennifer to handle this next stage of our talk.
Wow. Thank you both so much. Maybe it was a discipline of the no spoilers, but I did not expect this to be so much a conversation about writing. And it was just absolutely fascinating. I was hanging on every word. And I think, Brad, that you kind of offhandedly said that you would do this another year from now, come back and talk with Alex after his next book. So we're going to hold you to that.
Yeah, maybe I can return the favor next time.
Oh, there you go. And you have to come do it in Hartford at Mark Twain's house.
Oh, yeah.
So
Wow. That would be wonderful.
Okay. So yes, we do have some good questions from the audience, and I'll move right into them. Martina wants to know, what are you currently reading? And I'm going to put that to both of you.
Brad, you go first.
Oh, okay. So I am reading, and I'm going to blank on the author's name, and I apologize. And maybe Jennifer can help me on this, or maybe Alex. So I am reading something called Ridgeline, and it is by the author who wrote The Revenant, that the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio was done. So this is a very interesting story about pushing west, dealing with the Indians, expanding American territory, securing those areas. It's a fascinating read. Absolutely fantastic. It's called Ridgeline. So,
and maybe somebody in the audience will look that up for us and put the author's name in the chat.
I'm sure somebody will know. Yeah. I'm reading stuff on a theme which I've not really done before. So basically, again, it's for writing, it's for work. So I'm tentatively planning a novel, which is going to be about a murder investigation that's set in the past. So they're trying to investigate a murder that happened 20 years ago. So I'm now reading a series of books. I'm trying to get all the books that I can that deal with that kind of theme. And so about murders that happened a long time ago. The queen of that is Barbara Vine, Ruth Rendell writing as Barbara Vine, and she did about 15 fantastic psychological thrillers that are all set in the past. And so it's about an investigation about a murder that happened 16 years ago, 25 years ago, 100 years ago in one case in Asta's book. And there's something about that I just really love. And so I read that, and then I read Rough Cider by Peter Lovesey, which is about a man trying to investigate a murder that happened when he was a child. And now I'm going to start reading The Go-Between by L.P. Hartley, which is not a murder, it's not a thriller, but again, it's about a man trying to revisit his past when he was a small boy and how that sort of changed his whole life. And it's really fun seeing how these different writers attack that same kind of theme. I think it's I don't quite know why I find it so compelling, but I love the idea of trying to investigate a long forgotten murder, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's kind of exciting.
No, I get it. That's fascinating. And folks, remember that this is being recorded, so if you are not keeping up with all these recommendations, you can come back and listen to it again and gather them up. And yes, Jacques.
Jacques, I saw your comment earlier about Wilkie Collins, and you're absolutely right. Wilkie Collins is a huge influence on me, the mystery of him. And people say he wrote the first psychological thrillers, and I think that's right. And that's where the name Fosca, Edward Fosca, my villain in the Maidens, comes from Count Fosca from The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, because he's the most terrifying villain. And I had to steal the name and tweak it slightly.
Oh, a little homage.
Yeah, definitely.
So that kind of leads into our next question, which comes from our colleague Mallory. So Jacques and Mallory and I all work together. And Mallory, I have to thank you. You were the one who said, "Oh, Alex Michaelides has a new book coming out. You got to get him." And Jacques got you, and we're so thrilled.
Great.
So thank you, Mallory. Mallory wants to know: do you ever feel scared or uneasy during the writing process due to the subject matter?
Yeah. When I was working on the very first draft of the Maidens, I got to the end, the final few scenes, and I've been holding back on writing them for a while because I was scared of because I didn't quite know how they were going to go. And then I was so disturbed by what I was writing, what was coming out of me, that I went to meet a friend, and she just looked at me and she's like, "What's happened to you? Are you okay?" And I just was like, "No, I think I'm in a really strange, frightening place." And that's the only time that's ever happened to me.
Wow.
I think the ending of the Maidens kind of really messed me up a little bit. So yeah.
Are you okay now?
I am okay.
Wow.
I might try and write something a bit more cheerful next time.
I don't know. Might be cathartic, and you might need to do this. But I'm going to jump in with a question of my own, because when I was reading, I haven't, as I was telling you before the program began, I just got my copy of The Maidens and have not had a chance to read it yet. But The Silent Patient, and this might sound weird, but while I was reading it, I was thinking, this could easily just be, there's a lot of element of my favorite genre, which is romantic comedy. And, the romance between, not the comedy, but
yeah.
You know what I mean? You've captured a lot of what we love about relationship-y kind of stories and stuff.
Well, that's interesting. I think you'll like The Maidens even more then, because The Maidens is a kind of dark romance in my mind.
Oh.
I'm really interested in romantic literature. Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, obviously, but with that in mind.
You mean the comedy aspect of it? I was like,
no, sorry. That was probably not the best. But you get what I'm saying, and I bring it up because you said you might try to write something lighter, and I would love to read a romantic comedy that you wrote.
I think I'm always going to have a romantic subplot in my thrillers. I don't know what Brad thinks, but I like that kind of thing. Agatha Christie kind of always did that a little bit. I always get into that.
Yeah.
It's the old romantic in me, I think.
Well, I enjoy that, so thank you. Jacques says, "I hope The Maidens makes a better musical than The Woman in White."
Oh. I wish I'd seen that musical. I did think it might have been quite, haunting, but I'll take your word for it, Jacques.
So Becky wants to know, do either of you read any other genres just for enjoyment? And I think we've touched on this a little bit, but people seem to want to know about your reading lists. So
biographies, right? Do you read biographies, Brad? I love biographies. They really, particularly of writers. There was one of Tennessee Williams that I read like 4 times in a row while I was writing The Maidens, and I just found it so, because you can switch off because you're not getting another writer's voice in your head, and also it allows you to kind of get good tips on writing. I think. Brad, what do you think?
I agree. I'm a big history buff, particularly World War II. I like to read about Churchill. I think it was Francis Fukuyama who said that history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. So as I've been watching things happen in Poland, in Hungary, as I watched Putin go in and take the Crimean Peninsula, there's all of these. It was with echoes of the Sudetenland and Hitler saying, "I'm going in just to protect ethnic Germans." You know, that was kind of Putin's excuse for going into Crimea. So I'm a big history buff, and in fact, I have a book that I'm diving into, and I forget, I'd have to step off camera and get it, that a friend in the UK recommended, and it's a thick biography. This gentleman, I forget the position he had, but he was like the premier arts person in the UK, like through the 60s, and I don't know which museum he was in charge of, and it was given to me as a gift because I mentioned it that a friend in the UK, and it's been a fascinating book so far. I'm going to step, Jennifer, I'm going to step off.
I was going to say, now that you have to go get it now. And we'll ask a question. So Kathleen Murphy has two questions for you, Alex, one of which is, and again, we touched on this a little bit with your plans to go to France being canceled, but are you looking forward to a traveling like a physical traveling book tour in the future? Is that something you think you'll enjoy?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yes. I was fortunate to go to Spain just now. I went to Madrid and Barcelona for the Spanish launch of the book, and it was just so wonderful to be in a different country, but also just to be meeting people who readers like face to face and talking to journalists face to face, and it made me realize how much I've really deeply missed human contact. We all have, right?
Right.
And so I know that we're talking about me getting over to the US in October and traveling around to meet writers and readers and go to bookstores and stuff like that, which I really, really hope it happens because it would make my year. It would make me so happy to do that. Yeah. I've never really met any of my American readers, so it would make me to give me such pleasure to chat to people.
Well, I'm going to talk to your publicist and see if you can make a stop in Hartford on the way. That would be so fun. Kathleen also wants to know, can you tell us where the Maidens will be offered? Netflix, BBC, whatever.
Well, I don't know any of that yet, I'm afraid. But it's a long way off, and you know how long these things always take. Kenneth Clark. I know Kenneth Clark.
So Kenneth Clark was the youngest ever director of Britain's National Gallery at 29 years old. So it fascinating. The Brits seem to have more fascinating characters than we do. I mean, we've got a lot of interesting characters in American history, but there's eccentrics, yes. The ladies' men, Ian Fleming for me is just as fascinating as a person as he is a writer. I have second editions of all the Bond books. I don't have any firsts, but I have second editions, and just a fascinating. So this is fantastic, just so interesting. So
I'm very fascinated with Ian Fleming's neighbor Noel Coward, because they live next to each other in Jamaica, and I'm obsessed with Noel Coward, and that seems like a very interesting friendship. Maybe somebody should write about their friendship actually someday.
I set a climax in one of my thrillers on an island down in the Caribbean that Noel Coward used to be a frequent guest at. And that was, so I love stories of Noel Coward and Ian Fleming. That would make a fascinating book.
Yeah, it would.
Before we move on, I just want to jump into the chat. Brad, you quoted that famous quote about history not repeating but rhyming. So many quotations are misattributed to Mark Twain, and that is one that's commonly attributed to him that he did not actually say. So unless Mallory would be the expert on that, but I'm pretty sure I'm right that that's not one of his.
Great knowledge, Jonathan. Good knowledge. I'm impressed.
I've said it with such certainty, and I'm probably wrong.
The one that I heard attributed to Clancy, and somebody once said, no, it's Mark Twain who said that, is that the difference between fiction and reality is people expect fiction to make sense.
Ooh, I've not heard that one.
Okay.
Mallory.
It could be that it's neither Clancy nor Mark Twain, but I always love that people don't expect reality to make sense, but boy, your fiction, don't mess anything up. You better get it all, better all connect and pay off at the end and be nice little bow on the package.
Right.
That's a great line. Yeah.
What is it? Can each of you tell us about the very first thing you remember writing and how old you were when you remember writing it?
Yeah, I was very young. I think, I don't know, it must have been around the same time I was discovering Agatha Christie and stuff, but I think it may have even been younger. It was a notebook, and it was called The Perfect Murder. And it was, and then I began writing the first line, which I don't remember what it was. But then I quickly realized that it was going to be a lot harder than it looked. And so I abandoned that notebook. But I thought it was a really good title. I was very pleased with it. I still am quite pleased with the title. But yeah.
Maybe you can revisit that project.
Yeah,
what you're doing. How about you, Brad? What's the first thing you remember writing?
So I remember writing a play to put on in my family's house when I was 8 or 9. But my first real stab at fiction came after I graduated from college. I had done a semester abroad in Paris. I went back to stay with friends, and I thought I'd do something no American had ever done, move to Paris and write a novel. And I got first, nobody's ever done that. I got a couple of chapters into it and I quit. I was afraid of failure. What would happen if nobody liked it? What if I couldn't get it sold? And so I think most of us have that little voice in the back of our heads that discourage us from going after our dreams, that say, don't risk the embarrassment. And I've learned, having put that off, it was on my honeymoon. My wife asked me, what would you regret on your deathbed never having done? And I said, writing a novel and getting it published. And she said, okay, when we get home, you've got to make that happen. And that was my first novel, The Lions of Lucerne, 2 hours protected time each day. So I really believe that which we're most destined to do in life, we're often most afraid of.
No,
and regardless,
yeah.
If you knock it out of the park the way that Alex did with his first novel, that's fantastic.
What you're saying is I went through that same experience, Brad. Sorry to interrupt you, but
really?
That's that same experience. Yeah. That's why when people ask me my advice to budding writers, I always say you have to just persevere, because I nearly gave up writing The Silent Patient countless times, and often I would just think this is so bad, I just would put it in a drawer and just forget about it for a few months, and then a voice in my head would say, come on, take it out, try again. But it frightens me now to think how many times I nearly gave up and quit. And that's the thing. It's overcoming. The battle of being a writer really is overcoming these crippling voices in your head that tell you you're rubbish and you're no good at it. And they never go away, do they?
They don't. They don't. But I think that's what keeps you a good artist. Now I have to ask you, what felt better, completing the manuscript or getting it published? I mean, they're two wonderful feelings.
Yeah. Wow. Neither, really. The only thing that really touched me deeply was, it sounds so corny, was the friends that I've made, like Celadon, my publishers in the US. I just love them so deeply on not just a professional level, but like they all become such close friends.
They're wonderful.
And yeah, they're wonderful people. And so to suddenly be thrust into this family of these fantastic people that took care of me and taught me so much, and that was the bit where I suddenly thought, wow, my life is really changing now,
Nice.
So I would add to that question, I think Anne Lamott wrote in Bird by Bird about the anticlimactic feeling of getting the first copy. Like you think it's going to be like, oh my goodness. And it's like, this is it.
Yeah, I think about Anne Lamott on a daily basis because of the Bird by Bird thing, I find that really helpful. You just got to get it done. Bit by bit by bit by bit. So
very inspiring.
Yeah, it's a great book. If anybody's not read that and is watching, it really helps a young writer.
Have we frozen? Is everybody good?
Everybody's good.
Okay. Yeah. So we have just a couple more minutes, and I think we have a couple more questions. Let me just. And I think people are appreciating that you managed not to spoil anything. So these are two great questions. One of them is from Allison. She wants to know, what kind of music do you enjoy? And does either of you play a musical instrument?
Wow. Brad?
Okay. So I'm a huge funk fan. So Parliament. Okay. George Clinton. I got to meet George Clinton at a Simon & Schuster event because he had written a book for Simon & Schuster, and I got dragged over to him by my publisher, and he goes, "You're the guy that puts one of my songs in each one of your books." So for me to meet George, I do not play an instrument. It isn't for lack of trying. When I was a young man in grade school, it never stuck. I hear that music and math go together, and I am no good in either. So I'm a big funk fan. I'm a big fan of dance music and soul music. So anything that gets your body moving, I'm a big fan of. And the Great American Songbook, Cole Porter, Frank Sinatra, huge. Dinah Washington, I'm a huge Great American Songbook fan.
Yeah, I love all that stuff so much too. Yeah, I can't wait to go back to New York City and go to Marie's Crisis and this bar, where they play all that kind of stuff all night long, the piano, and everyone sings along, and it's such a great atmosphere. All of us had to learn an instrument in my house when I was growing up, and I tried the piano, but I wasn't clever enough, because I think you've got to be really smart to do two things at once, and I can barely do one thing at once. So I learned the flute instead, and I still play that to myself badly because I have no sense of timing. It's a great irony in that statement, I think. And also musically, I do listen to stuff, and weirdly, that's a weird question right now because we've just made a Spotify playlist of all the songs that inspired the Maidens and that I would listen to while I was writing the Maidens. So if you go on Spotify and look at the Maidens playlist, you'll find all of these great pop tracks that were a big inspiration to me.
Do your fans like that? Because I did the same thing for my book that's coming out next month. I did a playlist as well for Black Ice, all classic rock stuff that I was listening to during the action scenes. So have you received any feedback from readers?
Only literally, it was like an hour ago. So
wow.
Yeah. So it's great timing, that question.
Well, everybody in this audience is heading right over there, and then right over to Brad's. So.
I'm going to judge my musical taste when you see that playlist. Yeah.
No, but that's awesome. That's something to look forward to. And I think we'll end with it's a kind of classic question, but this one again is from Mallory, and particularly I think we want to hear the answer from both of you. What 3 authors, living or dead, would you want to have dinner with, if you could?
Oh, that's so tricky. So tricky.
You don't have to say each other. Let's just assume each other, and then. And you don't have to say Mark Twain either. Let's just take that pressure.
Yeah. Okay. 3 is difficult. I would say Agatha Christie, Billy Wilder, because I think of him as a writer, and Charles Dickens. How about that? That'd be an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Brad?
So I think Machiavelli, Casanova, and Moliere. Those would be my 3. So I do dinner like in Venice, Florence, and Paris. I do 3 dinners with 3.
I'm presuming you speak Italian and French, right?
I speak French. I don't speak Italian, so I would need to bring a translator in. I'm sure I can find stuff.
That's quite impressive.
Yeah.
Wow. And really, you both were supposed to say Mark Twain, so you failed that test. Well, I'm just going to double check that I'm not missing an audience question before I let you go. No, I think that we got everything, and I'm just so grateful to both of you for spending this time with us, and it has gone so quickly. It's been so fascinating. I know our audience has loved it too. And I'm going to just say, and Brad, I think we talked about this when you spoke for us last summer. The Mark Twain House is a writer's home and a home for writers, and we're always happy to add new writers to our community of people who write. And so you're both part of that community now. And
great. Thank you.
Thank you for being there for us, and thank you. And I can't wait to read your book. And
I really enjoy it, Jennifer. Thank you so much for everything, and thank you to everybody who's been watching. It's been such a I wish I could see everybody's faces, but first of all, Brad, thank you. That was such a great chat.
It was my pleasure, and it really was fun because I am a fan. So for all of you out there, if you get the Maidens now, even if you haven't read The Silent Patient, get that one as well. But you're going to love these books. And I would also suggest that if you've got anybody who loves reading, the best thing you can do for an author is word of mouth. So when you love a book, tell people about the book. It is better than any full-page ad in the New York Times or USA Today. So I'm appreciative for all the people who watch.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. That's really kind. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you both so much, and enjoy the rest of your day. And we will hope to hear from you again soon.
Great.
And people, buy the book. Follow that link.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.